Today's lesson is trigonometric functions on the calculator. My learning objective for today is I can evaluate trigonometric side ratios in degrees or radians, rounded to 4 decimal places, and angles to the nearest tenth of a degree by working through the flowchart. All right, so let's review. What does inverse mean? So inverse means I want to undo. Reciprocal means I want to switch my numerator and denominator. Okay, so today I'm going to be working with both of these concepts. So the inverse functions for trigs are side ratios and angles. So to undo a side ratio, I get an angle. To undo an angle, I get a side ratio. All right, today this is important that we are making sure that we are in the correct mode on our calculator. So I need to make sure whether the question is in degrees or radians and that I switch back and forth as I need them. Big picture, we always want to work in terms of the primary functions, and the primary functions are sine, cosine, and tangent. And the reason we want to work in terms of sine, cosine, and tangent is because our calculator has sine, cosine, and tangent, and we're working with the calculator. So if I have cosecant, I'm going to work with it as 1 divided by the sine. If I have secant, 1 divided by the cosine, or cotangent, 1 divided by tangent. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is rewrite in terms of the primary function if I need to. If I'm in the primary function, I can move on. If I am in the reciprocal function, I need to rewrite in terms of the primary function. And then I'm deciding, am I looking for the side ratio, which is the first function on the calculator? So I'm going to state the side ratio and I'm going to round it 4 decimal places. If I'm looking for the angle, that's where that is the second function on the calculator. So it's the inverse of the side ratio. I am going to decide what sign I'm looking for, positive or negative. And then I know that all angles are positive in 2 quadrants and negative in 2 quadrants. So I'm going to decide what 2 quadrants I'm working in by using All Students Take Calculus acronym to find for the positive quadrants. If I'm working for the negative ones, I'm working the other 2 quadrants. I need to find the reference angle, and then I need to state both angles in positive rotation, and I'm rounding these to tenths. Side ratios, again, I'm rounding 4 decimal places. All right, let's do some practice. All right, so let's start out with side ratios. I know I'm looking for a side ratio when the angle is given. Okay, because I have one or the other, and I know if I have degrees or radians, so I know if I have the angle or I don't have the angle. So if I'm given an angle measurement, then I know I'm looking for the side ratio. All right, I need to make sure I'm in the right mode and that I am given an angle. I know I'm looking for the side ratio. So let's start out with first example. This is an example where I'm given a primary function. So again, the primary functions I'm looking for are sine, cosine, or tangent. So I'm in the primary function because I have sine. I see a degree symbol, so I know I'm working in degrees. So I'm going to move my calculator into the degree mode. If it's not, I need to check. And then I'm going to put in my calculator sine of 51.4 degrees, and I'm going to get 0.7815. You should pause your calculator or pause the video and make sure you can get this. My next example is a reciprocal function. So I have a reciprocal function because I am not sine, cosine, or tangent. So when I have a reciprocal function, I want to rewrite in terms of the primary function. I know secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So this is 1 over cosine of 122.4 degrees. So I have a degree symbol, so I know I'm working in degrees. So I am putting 1 divided by the cosine of 122.4 in my calculator. And make sure you can get minus 1.8663. Again, I'm rounding 4 decimal places. All right, let's try another example. Okay, so now I want you to decide, am I working in the primary or the reciprocal function? I'm working in the primary function because I have sine. Am I working in degrees or radians? I have radians. I do not have a degree symbol, so I know I'm working in radians. I don't have to have a pi for it to be in radians. So I'm going to change the mode on my calculator to radians. And I'm going to type in sine 5 pi divided by 9. You're going to use pi on the calculator. And for fractions, I would use the alpha y equals and get used to that because that is the best way to work with radians. So pause the video and make sure you can get 0.9848 on your calculator. All right, I'm going to have you try 4 and 5. Can you stop the video and try these and see what you get? All right, how'd you do? I am checking. This is cosecant. Cosecant is the reciprocal. So the reciprocal means I need to rewrite. So I'm going to rewrite this as 1 over sine of 11 pi over 3. I do not have a degree symbol, so I know I'm working in radians. I need to make sure my mode on my calculator is in radians. When I type this in, I get negative 1.1547, rounding 4 decimal places. Number 5, secant of 3 pi over 7. Again, this is a reciprocal, so I want to rewrite this. Secant is 1 over cosine, and my angle is 3 pi over 7. I am working in radians. I need to make sure my calculator is in radians. And when I type this in, I get 4.4940 when I round 4 decimal places. Okay, so this is finding my side ratio. My side ratio only has one answer. We're going to move over to finding angles. Whenever I'm asked to be finding the angle, I am always looking for 2 answers. And the reason I'm looking for 2 answers is because all the trig functions, sine, cosine, tangent, secant, cosecant, cotangent, are all positive in 2 quadrants and negative in 2 quadrants. So I have 2 possible answers. So I need to know what the reference angle is. My calculator is always going to give me the easiest answer, so pay attention to whether it is positive or negative. If it gives me a negative answer, then that means it's going in the negative rotation. But by definition, a reference angle is always positive. And that I am expected to submit 2 answers every time I'm looking for an angle. All right, so let's do an example here. All right, find theta, where theta is between 0 and 360 degrees to the nearest tenth of 1 degree, and alpha is my reference angle. Okay, so in the directions, it's telling me I am going to be in degrees. So make sure we move our calculator to degree mode if we're not already there. When you're working with trig, that should be something you're always doing. You're always checking what mode you're in. Okay, so my first question, I'm looking for the cosine of theta equals 0.4512. So since I don't have the angle, I have the side ratio, so I know for sure I'm looking for the angle, and I know I have to have two answers. Cosine is the primary function, so I don't need to rewrite it. And the side ratio is positive. So I know I'm looking for the positive quadrants of cosine. So cosine is, all students take calculus. So cosine is positive in the first quadrant and in the fourth quadrant. So my answers are going to be in the first quadrant and in the fourth quadrant. So my reference angle is from the terminal side to the x-axis. So I have two angles I'm looking for. So my angle theta in the first quadrant is here, and my angle theta in the fourth quadrant is here. And we usually call them theta by the quadrant name. All right, so I know in the first quadrant alpha equals theta in quadrant 1. Okay, so I am going to solve for my reference angle. So the reference angle is the inverse. So that's going to be cosine inverse 0.4512. So when I put that in my calculator, I get approximately 63.2 degrees. So the angles we're measuring 2/10. Okay, so now that I know what the reference angle is, I know in the first quadrant, alpha equals theta. So theta in the first quadrant is 63.2 degrees. And my angle in the fourth quadrant is going to be 360 minus 63.2 degrees, which is 296.8 degrees. And I always state the angles in positive rotation, always. That is implied and understood how we answer these questions. Okay, let's try one more example. Okay, I want to find the angles. Cotangent theta equals negative 2.1468. So first question, is this the primary or the reciprocal? I have the reciprocal. So the reciprocal is 1 over cotangent of theta equals minus 2.1468. So I can look at this two different ways. I can look at this as these are logically equivalent, or whatever I do on the left-hand side, I can do on the right-hand side. So I can either switch cotangent of theta and negative 2.1468, or you can look at it as I'm going to flip and take the reciprocal of both sides. So either way, I get the tangent of theta equals 1 over negative 2.1468. Okay, so I am now deciding, am I looking for the positive or the negative angles? And I see I have a negative here. So all students take calculus. Tell me where the quadrants are positive. So cotangent is really tangent, and I want the positive. Everything's positive in the first quadrant, and tangent is positive in the third tangent, but I'm looking for the negative angles. So I want quadrant 2 and quadrant 4 because I want the negative quadrants. So here is my reference angle. Reference angle is going to the x-axis. So this is theta in quadrant 2, and this is theta in quadrant 4. So I'm giving myself a visual of what I'm trying to do my math calculations for. Okay, so the first thing I can do is I can get the negative rotation of this here. So I can solve for this angle here. So I'm going to take the tangent inverse for my fourth quadrant angle. It's going to give me an angle in the negative rotation, and then alpha is going to be that angle, but a positive number. So this is going to be negative, my tangent inverse of 1 over negative 2.1468, which is going to be, rounding to tenths, negative 25.0 degrees. So this is in the negative rotation, okay? So if I go in the negative rotation, alpha is going to be that angle as a positive number. So I know my reference angle alpha is 25 degrees because I'm not worried about what the direction is because alpha is always positive. So I know this is 25 degrees. So that is true for both angles. So theta in quadrant 2 is going to be 180 degrees minus 25 degrees, which is 155 degrees, rounding to 155.0, rounding to tenths. And rewriting the fourth quadrant angle as 360 degrees minus 25 degrees is 335.0 degrees. Okay, so the calculator is going to give you the easiest answer, so you have to make sure you understand what direction you're going and what the positive and negatives on the calculator mean versus what you're looking for. Okay, that's it.